be really appreciative when a tenant comes to you with something small to fix. Here's why. Hey, welcome to the Investment Property Geeks of Charlotte. We're your hosts, Chris
and Jesse.
And today we're talking about tenants, toilets, and termites.
Oh my.
Oh my.
Took us like 5 minutes to come up with that title, but we thought it was catchy.
Exactly.
It sounds better than preventative maintenance. It's
right.
just, it pops.
That's like the boring italicized subtitles, like preventative maintenance, you and your property, and maintenance at your property. But tenants, toilets, and termites sounded way cooler.
Much. At least to us geeks.
Exactly. Hey, please do subscribe. Leave us a review. That helps to make sure that other people can hear this podcast too. That, and we're just really needy and have low self-confidence. So anything you can do to boost that would be wonderful.
My self-validation rests entirely on this podcast. No pressure. No pressure.
We're hosed. I'm just kidding. All right. Go check us out at investmentpropertygeeks.com or on Facebook. You can search for Investment Property Geeks. And of course, if you want to write Jesse Mancuso a love letter, podcast at investmentpropertygeeks.com.
I'm so sorry if you have that much time on your hands.
He may not write back to you. Don't be offended.
But I'll smile.
But he'll smile.
Absolutely.
Maybe he'll get a selfie too.
Yeah.
Who knows?
You might. So yeah, as we teed it up, we're talking today about preventative maintenance, what you need to be doing as a landlord or property manager on your investment home. And we've got some, I think, pretty good tips right out of the gate here.
Yeah.
And certain items that we just want to make sure you are addressing.
And in addition to preventative maintenance, I think preventative maintenance is certainly a great place to start. But we'll tell you a little bit about, too, there's just more than preventative maintenance. There's like regular kind of maintenance that is initiated by the tenant or when you go out and do a property inspection. Then there's emergency maintenance. And then there's this whole other category of like big projects and remodeling. So we'll talk a little bit about all. Today's really about all kinds of maintenance. We're not going to get into every last detail, but hopefully give you an idea as, this is the folks that have been doing this a while. You're going to have already an idea of the different types of maintenance that there are. But the cool thing about you listening to this podcast, the lucky one, is that you now get some of our experience on all the crazy things that could happen.
And there's a lot.
Because I'll tell you, only owning, if you, like me, when I started, I had a handful of investment properties, and you thought you saw some crazy things, but ultimately, now that I know what I know, I didn't see that many crazy things. And so you never really know what to prepare for. But hopefully today we'll kind of give you some ideas of the realm of the possible so that you have an idea of what to prepare for if you're managing your own property or someone else is managing for you. And hopefully none of these things ever happen to you, and that's why you have insurance. But we do want to just make sure that you kind of understand, here's what maintenance potentially looks like on a property.
See, guys, Chris is the more professional in that he's giving you a summation of the entire podcast. I, on the other hand, am thinking, no, I'm just going to tell them one thing at a time to make sure they keep listening.
Yeah, and then it's going to be really hard to follow because, they'll have to. No, I'm just kidding. Jesse,
no,
you're doing great.
No, I totally appreciate your approach a lot more. I'm more making fun of myself because it's like I'm not telling them anything. It's like, hey, we're going to go one item at a time.
Well,
here.
I don't want them to go preventative maintenance to now.
Well, that's true.
Hey,
that's
there's going to be some nuggets, some horror stories
if
about
we kept
emergency maintenance.
If we had them engaged through risk mitigation, I think we can get them through preventative maintenance.
Yeah, no offense, Rob.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right, so Jesse, tell me more about preventative maintenance. And I'm going to apologize in advance. I have this delicious iced coffee here with me. So if every once in a while you hear an ice cube clanging in the microphone or Jesse's slurping, that's just us making sure we've got maximum energy to deliver an excellent podcast.
It's that part of the day where we needed a caffeine fix. So here we are.
Please forgive us. Yeah.
But yeah. On that note, I'll caffeinate it up. Here we go. So, preventative maintenance, what items, and this is, I wouldn't say, Chris, in a particular order, but these are kind of some of the more important things.
Sure.
kind of going from top to bottom here.
Yeah, and we'll give two. I think we'll just go through like a list. We have, it looks like maybe 11 if I can count Roman numerals. 11 items. And some of them are going to be more discretionary than others. And we'll give you an idea of why it's important or why to think about doing it. And then maybe timing wise of when you might kind of do these things too.
Right. So with that being said, starting right at the top, what do you think, anyone out there listening, is the number one thing we are going to talk about with maintenance? Give me 5 seconds to think about it. I was gonna drink my coffee while you were doing that. Yeah, there you go.
That's Jesse's giant slurp through the turbo straw.
All right, enough of the hype. HVAC, your HVAC system. A lot of people think of that as one of their biggest pain points on a home, and it certainly can be, because that could be a very, very expensive repair or replacement if necessary.
Yeah, the way I look at this, Jesse, is it's kind of funny. People, I've had a lot of arguments in the opposite direction. Like, why would I go pay for a preventative maintenance on my HVAC? It's only 2 years old. And it's kind of like, well, I guess you don't really think about changing the oil in your brand new car either, do you?
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's why you would do it. For those of you who don't think this is important, I'm just going to tell you now what very likely could happen if you don't do this. So here, when the meaning in the Charlotte area or the South in general, now coming from Washington, like, it's crazy. There are, out there, it is not common, even in $500,000, $750,000 homes, to have AC installed. AC in the summer, especially in Western Washington, like Seattle, AC in the summer is you open your windows. Like, so I used to work at Boeing, right? And so there would be days where there were usually 1 or 2 days during the summer where it'd get really hot. And then like the next day, everyone would either not come into work and call in sick or be really tired. And they'd just be like, I just laid out in bed all night and I couldn't sleep. So I'm not coming in because it was really hot. And like, that was just the thing there. Like it was like a reverse snow day. Like when it got really warm, like when it got above 90, people were just like, I couldn't sleep last night.
Wow.
Yeah. So here, like moving here, it was kind of interesting. And one of the first things someone told me, a very experienced property manager that we hired, she's like, hey, you got to try to get owners to do the preventative maintenance. Cause let me tell you how many times what'll happen here is that, okay, so I'm not going to get into the way your AC works, and we don't have all the time for me to go into this much detail on each one, but obviously I'm passionate about HV preventative maintenance. So we're going to talk about it. What happens is when the AC is working and the air is going over the evaporator coil that's in your furnace, it produces condensation. And because that warm air is going over the evaporator coil and it's going cold, and then there's condensation happening. And that condensation goes into a drip tray. And if you've ever looked at your HVAC unit or your heater or your furnace, there's this little, usually, PVC pipe coming out of the drip tray or out of the drain pan, and it's going to the outside of the house, and you can see that thing dripping. Well, that will produce several gallons of water a day. What happens is that drain will often get clogged. And there are devices to kind of stop the AC when that gets clogged, installed on some ACs. But like a safety on a gun, I'm from Idaho, so I use a gun reference. Apologize if that offends anyone. It can, and you should assume, will fail at some point in time. So basically what can happen is especially if your HVAC unit is in the attic, which is very typical here, so think about it this way. AC's running, everything's honky-dory, and then drip tray overflows because the drain's clogged, and you're basically dumping several gallons per day of water on your ceiling, draining now into your house through the drywall. That can be very expensive.
That's a problem.
Even here I guess in my personal residence, we were doing preventative maintenance, but at some point, I'm going to blame my landscaper who they moved those pipes or whatever, and somehow anyway, long story short, one of those pipes became disconnected, and it ruined our ceiling in our living room.
Ooh.
And we had to have it all repaired. So like that's a serious thing that can really happen. And that alone is enough. So that could be several thousands of dollars.
Yep.
And typically HVAC preventative maintenance is like maybe, depending on who you got it through, we usually get a pretty special deal on it, but it might be give or take $100 a visit. We do it once in the spring before it starts to get real warm, usually March-ish. And they're firing up the AC, making sure it works before the tenants really do. And then in the fall, making sure it runs appropriately. And that's just going to help save you the emergency middle of the night call, like, hey, my AC's out, or my furnace is out, that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's a lot, but that is...
I had to wake Jesse up.
No, well, the coffee is already doing that, don't
Yeah.
worry. But no, excellent points. So the moral of that story, and Chris made a lot of great points there, spend the money on that kind of preventative maintenance. A little bit of money on preventative maintenance now for your HVAC is going to be a lot better than the underlying issues that can occur if you don't, because, yeah.
Yep.
Having your ceiling, wow, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
That
stinks. Like
Yeah,
that's a real deal.
That's terrible.
Yeah. And, that's usually insurance would cover something like that, but it could be argued that, if you didn't do the proper preventative maintenance,
Right.
then you might be on the hook there too. So you just got to be careful with that kind of stuff.
Even if insurance covers it, you're still living through it. That's
Yeah.
not a good situation. But anyway, yeah. So HVAC,
Related.
exactly. Number 2, the next step, or the next thing that you want to make sure you're doing preventative maintenance on: air filters,
Yes.
changing regularly.
Exactly. So some folks will do this. They'll kind of use the inspection. They'll call it like an air filter change out, and they'll
Yep.
do the inspection at the same time. Say, hey, I'm here to change your air filters. Ultimately, it should be the tenant's responsibility. What we've found is unless you've got a solid system or process like doing it with the inspections, it's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Or what we do is we actually drop ship them air filters. And that's pretty handy. And they come with like a little expiration date on the air filter itself. So you're going through, and they're high quality filters, and it comes with little, instructions on like, hey, I'm an air filter, and this is why clean air is important, and here's how you install me, and like goofy things, but it helps. We recommend doing that quarterly. Again, if you don't, one, we kind of sell it to the tenant as like, hey, this is going to help you save on your utility bill, which it does. Because when an air filter gets clogged, that HVAC has to run a lot more, which is going to put more wear and tear on your system and cause their power bill to go up. So change out that air filter quarterly, figure out a way to make sure it's getting done. Don't put that off. You could be costing yourself literally an HVAC system several years prematurely.
Yep. Again, easy fix, and that's a very inexpensive preventative maintenance item too.
Yep. But again, the easy thing to do is also easy not to do.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And this is kind of one of those things where, sometimes we talk about fees of a property management company, and people call in and like they want to talk about the difference of 1 or 2%, management fee difference. And it's like, hey, this alone is probably more savings than the 1 or 2%. Just by making sure air filters actually get changed.
Absolutely.
And no one asks that question, but that's something that you should be thinking about as a manager of your property.
No question about it. The next one actually is something that, so many people forget about: gutters, rain gutters, making sure they're clean, making sure you have nothing obstructing the drainage system from your rain gutters. And I'll tell you, this was a problem for me on a house that I just recently sold. Moved in, the rain gutters were clean, or so I thought. And, having a wooded backyard, you'd think to yourself, all right, well, I'm going to get up there and get them cleaned out and do a pretty decent job. Well, you don't just need to do a decent job. You need to make sure those rain gutters are clean, because water damage, going back to our earlier example of your HVAC through your ceiling, that can be pretty problematic.
Water is the number one enemy, our number one enemy, hands down. Like the things that I worry most about when it comes to maintenance on a property and damage is absolutely water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, whether it's from the HVAC unit, from rain, or from some sort of pipe bursting or something like that. Absolutely, water is the most likely any sort of emergency damage you're going to have, or expensive damage, oftentimes is going to come from water.
Yeah, you don't think about it, but if that rain gutter is clogged, that water has to get out or get down somehow. Water is always going to seek its lowest point.
Yep.
And if it's doing that, it's potentially coming down on your siding. It's seeping into the crawl space, essentially, if you have
Yep.
a crawl space or a basement, yeah, you can have a lot of issues with a clogged gutter.
Yeah, absolutely. Or coming back and going under the eaves or the fascia or whatever, and you can have lots of rot, like Jesse said. So, this is something where I'll be honest with you. If you've got trees that are tall, then have the gutters cleaned a couple times a year. Or we have some properties where it's like every month or two in the fall because it's just super duper wooded.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a lot of areas like some of these what I call vinyl villages, where all the trees are younger and small and that kind of thing, and nothing goes up above the house, you probably don't need to clean the gutters very often.
Right.
Or just tell the tenant, like, hey, if it's ever a problem, let me know, and then go look on your inspections. But you don't need to do it. Like, there's no sense. I'm a big fan of preventative maintenance, but I'm not a fan of wasting money.
Yeah,
so don't
absolutely.
go throw money at cleaning gutters just to go spray the dust that comes down from the roof shingles 2 times a year.
Yeah,
that
great
doesn't
point.
Make sense.
Yeah, but the flip side of that, of course, is when you've got that wooded yard, well, then you're going to need to do something a little bit more than those vinyl villages. I like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty good.
Vinyl Village. Yeah.
There you go.
I stole that from someone else. Also, not something we really had in Washington State or Idaho. There were some vinyl homes, but nothing like down here in the South.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, most of it there is like hardy plank, or they had this old LP siding, which was like recalled. That was really bad. There's like a class action suit or something like that. I hope I didn't say that wrong and get myself in trouble.
We're going to find out.
Yeah. If so, we'll be coming back and doing some post editing.
There we go.
All right, Jesse, what's next?
Next one, dryer vent.
Yeah. So we don't want any dryer vent fires. We recommend you do this one. We've got some firemen here, some retired firemen who do our dryer vent cleaning, and they recommend doing it once a year. We set properties up on like once a year, every 2 years, which is better than not at all, which is what a lot of people do. Here's what I'll say. Two things that should encourage you to get your dryer vent cleaned. One, you don't want a fire. Two, what's much more likely to occur, especially if you own the dryer, it will damage the dryer.
Mm-hmm.
We had a brand new Samsung dryer, and we moved in to a home, and we had not yet had the dryer vent cleaned, and we have 3 young boys. And within like through the first year and a half, my wife's like, man, the dryer's just not drying anymore. I'm like, oh, we never had the dryer vent cleaned. And then, so we go get the dryer vent cleaned, and then sure enough, the heating element in the dryer had gone bad. It had been so overworked that like a brand new dryer, after a year and a half, we fried the heating element. So, and that was a $350 part. So, it's like $75, $100 to get the dryer vent clean. Clean the dryer vent.
Yeah, it's well
it's
worth
cheaper
it.
than replacing the dryer heating element.
Yeah.
So
Funny, similar cautionary tale for you. I moved into, it was a rental property, but the property management company, did not clean out the dryer vent.
Ugh.
Same situation. We're drying our clothes. Why is it taking 45, 50, 55 minutes to dry, t-shirts? That just doesn't seem normal. Well, come to find out, they did not do the dryer vent cleaning properly, and they actually ended up having to replace the dryer. So
yeah, exactly. Yep.
creates a lot of problems.
Absolutely. That's a clue. If the tenant's like, there's always moisture when I'm done drying the clothes, or it takes forever. I have to dry it 2 or 3 times. It might be the dryer, but check the dryer vent first, especially if you haven't done it. Just get it done. Do it every year, every couple years, whatever. Just make sure you're doing it on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
Cheap, easy, expensive if you don't.
Yeah. A little money now versus a lot of money later.
Yep.
That's the moral of this whole section. Anyway, next, yard maintenance, yard preventative maintenance.
You almost said that like a pirate. Yard.
I was trying to mix it up a little bit. Hey, did you hear about the new pirate movie coming out this weekend, by the way?
Are you serious?
It's rated R.
Oh.
Hashtag dad jokes.
Wow.
You can use
My
that.
kids are going to hate that one.
So are our listeners, but
Yep.
we're still here.
So yard maintenance is one of those things where you don't, like here, it's not typical for the owner to provide yard maintenance, but we always tell folks like, hey, if you're anal retentive about your yard, you should think about maybe doing some things, especially if you're potentially moving back in, or you think you're going to sell the property in the near future. Look, most of our tenants are really awesome at keeping up on the property, but not everyone is a green thumb. And so that is one area that, unfortunately, I think sometimes that stigma is kind of true. Some tenants are awesome and keep a beautiful lawn. Other tenants are like, I don't really know how to do a lawn because I've only lived in apartments. And
Right.
so if you're concerned about that, you might want to think about just providing like aerating and seeding services in the fall. Or maybe you have your landscaper come by and trim shrubs a couple times a year and aerate and seed. It's typical in a single family type environment, I should say single family home rental, to be a little bit more clear. It's typical for that to fall back on the tenant.
Right.
But if you've got a nice property, and like I said, if you're looking to sell soon, this goes back to episode, I think it was 1 where we talked about, or 2, where we talked about like, hey, what's your strategy, your goal, your long-term vision, that kind of thing. If you're going to sell in a year or two, like you might want to strongly consider providing some level of yard maintenance and leave the mowing up to the tenant or whatever. Know that even if you do, we get a lot of owners who ask, hey, if I provide yard maintenance, can I bill the tenant back for that or increase the rent? Yeah, you might be able to increase the rent a little bit, but you're never going to be able to increase the rent nearly enough to cover your expense for all the yard maintenance. So you're kind of mitigating risk there of just saying like, hey, in general, I feel like tenants might not take such good care of it. So I'm going to go ahead and provide that, knowing that I'm going to do so at a little bit of a loss, but hopefully that saves me from having a $2,000 or $3,000 bill later and then having to wait 6 months for the yard to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also comes back to what we always say, Chris, like attracts like. You can have the most beautiful house on the inside. We want to make sure the yard reflects that as well.
Sure.
You want that curb appeal.
And most tenants are going to do a pretty good job taking care of it. But you should, as an owner, you should be expecting to, this could be written in the least different ways, but kind of how we do it is we say, tenant's responsible for light trimming of shrubs and mowing and edging and weeding. And then the owner would be responsible for putting down mulch, pine straw, trimming big trees, that kind of thing. You don't want a tenant up in your really ugly Bradford pear with a chainsaw. That's just not.
It's not going to end well for anybody.
Not good practice.
Yeah.
Especially if it's your chainsaw that you left in the garage.
Oh.
Don't do that, by the way. Don't do that.
And if you are thinking about that, re-listen to our risk mitigation podcast episode. Because do not do that.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely.
So next, pest control, which in the South could be a major thing.
This was also a huge eye-opener moving here. Like the Jumanji bugs is what I call them. Like a bee here is legit.
It did, yeah. It's like the size of your fist.
Exactly.
It's intimidating.
Like, wife's like, why are you getting in the car? It's like, oh, I got to go kill a bee. I remember when we moved here, she saw her first bug like flew by her and she's like, what was that? And the first month, I think she said, if I would have known the bugs were going to be this big, I seriously doubt you could have got me out here.
So, yeah, that's a fair point, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a small thing, having a home on a preventative maintenance plan for pest control where it's needed. I mean, it's not going to be needed everywhere and in every circumstance, obviously.
I would say for the most part, don't do it. Like, unless there's an issue. Now, here's the deal. Typically, how we're going to approach this is we're going to say like, hey, look, when the tenant moves in after a few weeks, like they should be able to move into a pest-free home.
Right.
No questions asked. After a few weeks, if it's pest-free, like, I don't mean like rodents, I mean like bugs and things, little bugs, common household bugs. Then it's the tenant's responsibility. And we'll give them some tips and tricks on like, hey, here's how to do it. Now, in the first few weeks, obviously they didn't cause a pest or it wasn't, and stuff's going to happen when a property's sitting vacant. We'll go ahead and take care of it for them, bill it back to the owner. You should do that. That goes back to tenant is your customer, want them to have a good moving experience, you want them to stay, etc. If it's something like a rodent, you need to take care of that.
Oh, yeah.
Don't charge that back to the tenant. That rodent somehow got in because of something in the house, whatever. And now if the tenant is causing the issue where they're leaving food out and things like that, they could potentially be liable for that. We'll talk about billing folks back later. But so I guess what I'd say is unless you feel like you really got to protect your property, because we'll talk about, termites here too. Unless you know that home is prone to termites or you want to have it on a preventative termite treatment plan, I wouldn't worry about paying for pest control. It's the South. People who live here kind of know, hey, I gotta just treating your home for bugs regularly is something you just got to do.
Yep.
It's like mowing the lawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
So don't worry about spending money on that more often than not. If you want to be nice and you're real concerned about it, again, you can do it. But
yeah, I think that's sound advice.
Yep.
And you kind of already led into termites.
Yep. So yeah, termites. There you go. termites, carpenter bees, you go ahead and get yourself an inspection. You should kind of know if there's been presence of some or not. And then you can do the treatment, which is separate from the termite bond. The termite bond is kind of like where the company comes out and they warranty the work they did, and they've got $1 million bond or whatever. That's the expensive part.
Yep.
Is the bond. Very few of our owners do that. Very few folks have termite problems, but again, it's kind of one of those things where if it goes undetected for long enough, then it can be a very expensive problem. So I don't know. I'm not going to give you advice one way or another whether you should or shouldn't. I think you just need to make sure you make the sound decision and the one that's right for you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's going to depend on the circumstances.
Sure. What else we got, Jesse?
Pool and hot tub.
Yeah. So my advice in general is like, don't have a hot tub.
Yep.
So if you've got a hot tub with the property, Facebook Marketplace is your friend. That's where it should go.
Yeah.
Just don't bother with it. It's a drowning hazard. It's a upkeep nightmare, and you're probably not going to get enough premium rent to make it make sense.
Yeah. It's just not worth it. Absolutely.
Kind of hard to do that with a pool.
Yeah, you're not selling that on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. We made a nice pond for you. I hope you guys enjoy the pond or the the giant oval garden that we filled in. Yeah. So no, just hey, look, if you've got a pool, you're gonna want to don't leave it up to the tenant to maintain that.
Yeah.
thing. You could, but again, the damage is gonna be way offset, and most people don't know how to maintain a pool.
No.
And if they're renting it, they're not gonna maintain it. So just take care of it for them. Get it done.
Much better off.
Yep.
Moving on, water heater, and specifically a water heater flush.
Yeah. Now, most people don't do this.
No.
I'll be honest, I don't. But we put it on here because technically, most manufacturers, unless they say they're self-cleaning, which I don't even know how that works, and I'm a pretty handy dude, but I don't know what it makes a self-cleaning water heater anymore. But basically what happens is in a water heater, sediment builds up over time and it kind of erodes away at the tank itself. So you got to flush that out to prevent, it from building up more and potentially degrading or reducing the life of your water heater. And if you read the fine print or ever have tried to replace a hot water heater like I have, the manufacturer might say, well, did you flush it on a regular basis? And how can you show me proof that you flushed it and maintained it per the specifications in order to not void the warranty? And you're like, you got to be kidding me. No one flushes their hot water heater. But it's we offer it as an option just in case, you want to do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah. Yep.
Anyway, all right. Yeah, enough about flushing hot water heaters.
Since we're obviously not too big of proponents of it. Walkthroughs, basically to tighten down anything wet loose.
Yeah. Yeah, just when you're doing your walkthroughs and your inspections, it's a good opportunity to see if things wiggle.
Yep.
On the wall.
It's just that simple.
Doorknobs, just anything that makes the tenant's life a little easier, adjust cabinet doors, that kind of thing. Toilet paper holders are common, fall off. Towel bars, that kind of thing. Just make sure all that stuff's kind of tightly affixed. Make sure that there are no gaps between another good one is like in your showers and whatnot. Again, water is your biggest enemy. So especially take a look at this, like listen for toilets hissing when you flush after you're done, or look for any signs. I'm kind of getting into the next one too. Check for plumbing, etc. So when we go do our walkthroughs, we'll usually like flush all the toilets, and we like to. It's gonna sound kind of weird, but we'll actually like feel the pipe coming from the wall and then up. I actually went to a property today that I was looking to purchase as an investment, and I flushed the toilet, and it didn't flush, and I thought, So I turned on the water. That's why they had it off. It's dripping. And then of course you ask the realtor ahead of time, do you know of any defects? Nope, don't know of any.
No, of course not.
Yeah. Oh, I wonder who turned off the water, the toilet fairy?
Somebody did.
Yeah. So anyway, flush a toilet, make sure the water's running, and check for that, because the tenant's not always looking for that stuff. Run the water in the tubs. Look to make sure that there are no big gaps that are going to let water in behind the faucets and things like that. And then run the sinks and open up under the sinks and run your hand along the P-trap after it's been running for a while and on the supply lines to the sink. That's another area where we will often find some leaking, or sometimes around the drain itself if it's an older sink or things like that. So those are things that you just want to be looking for on the walkthrough. And like Jesse said too, with the gutters and things, you want to be looking for, are there areas around the house where water's collecting or coming back up against the house that might be showing signs of erosion or that kind of thing. So again, especially just be on the lookout for water and rot and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you found that helpful. And I guess, we really did go in high order of priority there.
Yeah, for the most part. And, I think, like you said, Jesse, I think those are like some real practical tips on things to be looking out on to maintain your property. Now, look, someone out there is driving or not, or walking their dog, and they're like, well, what about this? Well, yeah, you're probably right.
Absolutely.
These are just things that we kind of look for on a regular basis. Of course, there are other things that we're not going to include on this list. But anyway, those are kind of some of the big ones.
Yeah. So with all that being said, the question now becomes, who should be doing the preventative maintenance, or any type of maintenance for that matter? Well, simple question, simple answer. Not you, if you're not a professional. Chris and I were talking a little bit about this before. A lot of people are very handy, and that's great. But if you are not a licensed electrician, I beg of you, please do not take that screwdriver and think you're going to fix that electrical socket. If you are not certified to work on an HVAC unit, don't think just because you've watched a YouTube instructional video, you're ready to go out there and actually do something. You're not.
Well, and just think about too, like, I'll get a little bit dark here for a minute, but if you go and you replace an outlet and you YouTubed it and that outlet later shorts and something happens where like someone dies in a house fire or something like that,
right?
Who do you think's going to be like on the bench, when it comes time to that family taking someone to court? It's going to be you.
Yeah.
So just think that's not worth it. And you might have the best of intentions, but they're really not going to care.
Right.
And, the other thing is, like Jesse said, a lot of people think they're handy, but most people aren't handy enough. Even a lot of handymen that out there do that full time do really shoddy work.
Oh, very much so.
And back to like attracts like, you don't want them doing work on your property and then, it attracts really crummy tenants in the future. So unless you're really good and you're professional about it, and you got to be professional, when you come over and you're doing a repair, if you're doing it on your own. I'll be honest with you. I used to do my own, but I was always really professional about it. And I actually am fairly handy, but when I would get to something, I would just tell the tenants like, hey, I'm really sorry. I thought I could fix this. I can't. I'm calling this guy. He's going to fix it for you and make it right. I apologize. I couldn't get it tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's more than adequate because, you've made the attempt, you're handling it professionally, you're communicating clearly, hey, I have tried. This is not something that's beyond the scope of my expertise. So
yeah, exactly.
And you have to remember too, your time is money. What's the value of your time too? You're sitting out there actually working on this. I mean, is that the best utilization of your time out there trying to fix a ceiling fan?
Right, exactly. I mean, if it goes back to, you have an investment. I told this to a client the other day, and I'm going to keep anonymity here as best as I can. This is a client that has a job, a career rather, that's a rather high-paying career. He and his wife both. And the conversation I had, he's like, oh man, I could have done that for blah, blah, blah. I could have done it myself. And it's like, well, yeah, but let me ask you this. Do you want to own an investment property or do you want to own a second job? Because those are two different things. And you're talking about wanting to own a second job.
Yep.
And if that's okay and you want to go get paid to turn a screwdriver, hey, nothing against that. But I don't understand how you go to work 50, 60 hours a week to make 4 times as much as someone who's turning a screwdriver. And your goal in life is to own a second job turning a screwdriver.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. No, you want to own an investment property. Well,
Right.
Guess what? Investments are passive most of the time. Real estate's a little bit more active than others, but it doesn't need to be, you shouldn't be buying a job.
Right.
You're buying an asset
Yeah.
that puts money in your pocket. So think of it that way.
Yeah. And, Chris, to your example, you obviously go over when you were doing your maintenance. you were professional. You handled it the right way. But I'm just imagining this nightmare scenario of an owner out there, hey Siri, how do I fix this garbage disposal? Like that's weird to the tenant. That's
Yeah.
you're gonna make them very uncomfortable if you're not handling it the right way. So.
Yep. Yeah. I'll give you another kind of tidbit on how to think about this. So if you've got an investment property, right? And you've got ownership in this asset, think about it like if you own stock in Apple, right? And there's a build, like you're an investor now in Apple and you expect some sort of passive return. Well, guess what? If something breaks in one of the offices at Apple, you're not going to show up with your hammer and screwdriver saying, hey, I want to save my fraction of a penny per share because I know how to do this repair myself. No, by being an investor of that company, you've entrusted other people to go do that for you so that you can just sit on your couch and watch TV and the money still comes in. It should be no different with your investment property. Unless you're making a conscious effort where you're really trying to like scrape pennies, you really want to learn it, or you really like that is a better use. Like maybe you have a job where you're getting paid the same or less than you would pay someone else. That might be an instance where it makes sense if you're really good at that kind of thing. So
right.
Yeah. Anyway, the other thing you shouldn't do is what, Jesse? So you shouldn't do the maintenance, especially if you're not qualified.
Oh my gosh. Don't just let the tenant.
Even if they say they're handy.
Right.
Don't.
Same rule applies there.
Don't do it. Don't do it. I'll give you an interesting story. So I had an investor one time. He's like, yeah, so I had this property and the tenant signed the lease and I gave him a screwdriver after he signed the lease. And I said, this is your maintenance number. If something breaks, use the screwdriver.
Yikes.
I don't want to hear from you unless it's an emergency.
Wow.
That's like, wow. Also, don't ignore the tenants because here's what will happen. This is a little bit counterintuitive, and people make a big mistake on this often. Property managers and especially DIY owners and investors. Let me phrase this a different way. Be really appreciative when a tenant comes to you with something small to fix. Here's why. A lot of you are going to be like, what? No, I'm not made of money. I don't want to fix every last little thing. But think about it this way from the tenant's perspective. If every time they call you about something broken, you say no or don't worry about it, eventually they're going to become numb and they're going to think, anytime I call about something, they don't want to fix it. So now what's going to happen is that stain that's starting to form on the ceiling is going to get ignored and keep turning bigger and bigger and bigger. And oh, by the way, the soft spot that started to form in the trim next to the shower is going to keep growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And the siding that's coming down, that little gap, is going to keep getting bigger and water is going to keep getting back there. And now all of a sudden, 3 years from now, they move out and you've got $5,000-$10,000 worth of damage and you go, what the heck? You did it to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely you did it to yourself because you had someone in there. Like this person is looking, it goes back to like, look, if we said this before, you've got a briefcase full of $300,000 in cash. Do you want someone to tell you if there's something, if like they see a leak in the briefcase and money's falling out? Heck yeah.
Of course you do. Of course.
It's no different than your property. You've got someone in there who cares, who wants to take care of it. Reward them for taking care of it and go, hey, okay, you know what? Yeah, I understand that the sink's a little bit slow to drain. Here's what you can do about it, or let me go ahead and get that fixed for you. So that we can get it taken care of. I really appreciate you calling me and letting me know about it. We always want to make sure we're looking at that kind of stuff. Thank you so much for letting me know.
Yeah.
And reinforce that.
Yeah. To your point, Chris, like the owner or the tenant, that's your boots on the ground. Those are the people that are there theoretically 24/7. They live there. They're going to be able to identify something much more easily and much more readily than a property manager or you as an owner going out to just check on the property.
Yeah, because guess what? Here's the other crummy thing. Most of those things that we just talked about, like we've actually seen this in a lot of properties that we inherit from other property management companies or from owners where the tenant just stopped calling because there were so many things that didn't get fixed. Well, one of the things they stopped calling about, and this was really sad is like they would take a shower. There's this one tenant, they'd take a shower in like standing water all day each time. And it turns out like over time, water had been leaking through the shower and like clogged, and it was leaking around the seal in the shower pan. And had it not been clogged, that wouldn't happen. Well, it rotted out the entire subfloor and joists underneath the whole corner of the house. Like to rot out a joist, like that's some time of water damage. And so this owner had like $15,000 worth of damage. And guess what? Did insurance cover how much do you think? Zero.
Absolutely.
Because it was not sudden and accidental.
Right.
It was lack of routine maintenance. And insurance isn't going to cover that. So, oh man, was that owner upset. And it's kind of like, well, you hired a property management company that kept telling the tenant no on the little things. And so guess what? They kept taking a shower and standing water all day because they couldn't get them to fix anything else. So why would they bother with that?
They gave up. And look what happened.
And technically it's the tenant's fault, but how much do you think we're able to collect from that tenant? Nada. Yep. Now, again, we inherited that problem, but that's just a good example of that's what you're going to do to yourself if you don't, if you don't take these little requests seriously. So we always tell our owners when they're like, oh man, why did the tenant want, and it's like, hey, be grateful. They want to take care of your property. That's good. You want someone in there who really cares.
Exactly.
Another story, why to not let tenants take care of your maintenance. I had a tenant one time who thought he was pretty handy, and he probably was. But I went to go do the move out with him. And at some point over the previous few weeks, he had decided like the caulk in the shower was insufficient. So he put like this marine grade caulk on there, only put it on with like a paintbrush and it was yellow. And so, my mistake at the beginning was I kind of told him like, hey, if there's something really small, I'm happy to do it. If you see something and you want to take care of it, that's fine. Just let me know and bill it. I'll deduct it from the rent. That was dumb. Don't do that. Because then the guy's like, oh, okay, I'm handy. And he was a really nice guy. And I hated charging him for it because I think it's the only thing I had to charge him for. But man, he was not as handy as we all thought he was. So just, even if you think someone's handy, even if they have a job as a contractor or something, just do me a favor. Get someone else to do the work. Don't let them do it. So anyway,
absolutely.
Enough about that. Also, you want to make sure whoever's going out there, certainly you want to make sure that they're insured. So this is important. Make sure they have liability insurance. If something happens on the property, you want them to be held accountable for it. You don't want them coming back to who they think is a big, fat, rich landlord. Also, ideally, they have workers' comp insurance. So let's give a real example. Someone's up there cleaning your gutters. They fall off the ladder, break their back, break their neck, whatever. Maybe the gutter was loose while they're cleaning it. They don't have workers' comp insurance. They're making $30 an hour. Well, if they own their own company, maybe, I don't know. If they're not owning their own company, maybe they make $15, $20 an hour. Guess who they're coming after? They think you've got all the money. So make sure they're insured. When they're licensed, you just want to make sure that if they have to be licensed, they are. So if they're plumber, HVAC, electrician, that kind of thing. Yeah. Other than that, handyman can usually do 80% of the work that comes up at your property.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do you handle this, basically? How do you, as the owner, investor, or property manager, handle maintenance? Now, for us, we have a lot of requests coming in through our online portal, and I'm sure a lot of other property management companies are doing the same thing. But if you're, an owner, just doing your own property management, what's happening? How are you handling these maintenance requests? Are you getting phone calls? Are you getting texts? Is it an email? Is it a combination thereof? I would say you need to have very clear expectations and a very set strategy for handling that as these things come in, because of all the reasons Chris and I just mentioned. If you're ignoring things as your own property manager or as the person who needs to be handling this, you're only shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah, and remember, you're on 24/7 because these emergencies will happen. I kind of say like, I give people the example like, hey, it's going to happen on a weekend or it's going to happen over the holidays. Well, guess what? Most of them do. And the reason why, that's when people are home. Yep. And that's when they have company over. And so when company, like I learned from a plumber recently, unfortunately, during a really nasty experience, that like Thanksgiving, this is going to sound gross. Plumbers are super busy around Thanksgiving. the systems just get taxed. So families coming over, people are staying, lots of food being eaten, lots of drinks being drunk.
There it is.
And so, think about that as an owner. Are you going to be ready to step away from turkey dinner and take that call? It's like, hey, sorry, sewer's backed up or whatever. And now you got to go handle that.
Right.
And you got to go find a plumber that's open, that you can trust, that's not going to throw you under the bus to the tenant and that kind of thing, saying, oh, this should have been taken care of a long time ago, who's going to adequately document so you know whether or not you can charge it back to the tenant.
Yep.
And oh, by the way, not only do you have to take that call, but I hope you're in a spot where you can take that call, or you're not in an airplane where you don't get cell service. Because that's another thing to think about. Hey, if you are ever going to go on vacation, who's going to handle your calls that come in, even if it's just one? Who's going to take... If there's an emergency call and they can't get a hold of you, what are you going to do? If you're like, me or Jesse does, you go out to the woods a lot. There's not always cell phone reception there. So
that's why I go to the woods. Man.
Right, exactly. So if you're going to go out camping, or you're going somewhere where you can't have cell phone reception, you need to think about like, hey, what happens if if the tenant can't get a hold of me? There's got to be a backup plan. So you got to have that plan in place, and those people got to understand who your vendors are and what to do if certain things happen, because something can and will happen eventually.
I'll tell you, because Chris, you're 100% right. If you're your own property manager, it's not, a Monday through Friday job, 8 to 5. You need to expect those phone calls at the most inopportune times. I had an investment property out in Arizona, and I was on a flight from Los Angeles back here to Charlotte. And in the, about a 3.5, 4 hour flight, whatever, with the jet stream, in those 4+ hours that I was on the airplane, the HVAC system stopped working in my condo in Arizona. Now, as you might imagine, Arizona gets pretty hot. Yeah. And I fortunately had a property manager because, I'm living here in North Carolina. I can't handle things that far apart. But, if I was trying to do that on my own, those tenants are sitting there roasting in the middle of the day. It was handled before I even touched down here in Charlotte. But thank goodness it was. And if you think it's not going to happen to you that way, oh, trust me, it will.
Yeah, and it might not be something as benign as a HVAC going out. Which we'll get into in a little bit about emergency maintenance calls and what kind of things can happen there. So, all right. So I think we kind of covered that. So make sure you got a plan in place for if you're doing it on your own. Your tenants always have someone to get a hold of 24/7, 365. All right. So when regular maintenance calls come in and you've got that system set up, first thing you're going to want to do is troubleshoot. We do have YouTube now. So things like, here in the South, we get a lot, especially people moving in from out of town. It's like, hey, the dishwasher doesn't work. Okay, did you realize that we put our dishwashers, for some strange reason, on light switches down here? Now, electricians will tell me, well, yeah, that's so you can disconnect the dishwasher. I'm like, yeah, that's why you put them in a plug and don't hardwire them like we do it on the West Coast. But anyway, I digress. So then you tell the tenant, hey, did you happen to switch the dishwasher on? Did you happen to check to make sure the water was turned on? That kind of thing. You can diagnose those types of things over the phone. Or another common one are garbage disposals. So have a good YouTube for like how to unjam a garbage disposal safely. Also, lighting fireplaces. That's another real popular one. A lot of folks don't know how to light a gas fireplace. So make sure you've got like a YouTube video queued up for that too. You can send folks. Those are common ones that we get a lot. Certainly you can get other ones too, but those are some common ones. So troubleshoot over the phone. Hey, have you checked the breakers? Have you checked, this, that, or the other thing? Don't ask them to go, do something unsafe, like take the cover off of a light socket and poke a screwdriver around in there or anything like that. It's like just common things that they can test for. Make sure that you're getting them, like if they say the HVAC's out, like, okay, well, tell me more. Is it out in every room? Can you feel any air coming out at all? Or is it not cold? What does the thermostat say? What has it been set to? What's it say that it's reading at? Because it might be that that's just the house and everything's okay, but they just think something's wrong. And so you want to gather as much data as you can. And then that way, too, you have a better idea of who to send out there.
Right.
So troubleshoot first. And then, the question comes back a lot like, hey, can we bill the tenant back for something? Usually not if it's a good tenant. Most things are just going to be normal wear and tear. But if the tenant did something out of negligence, you can bill them back. Here's an example I give for anyone who has kids. If you gave your kids an allowance and they did something to break something that is something that you would take out of their allowance because they're being dumb, that's the same type of thing you could bill a tenant back for. If they broke something and you wouldn't take it out of their allowance, it's kind of the same type of thing. Not to compare tenants to children, but like, here, I'll give you this example. If someone's roughhousing around and they break something, bill it back to the tenant. If they put a bunch of potato peels down the kitchen sink and it gets clogged, bill it back to the tenant. If the tenant's just walking through the house, they open the door and the doorknob pops off, that's normal wear and tear.
Right.
Don't bill it back to the tenant. Sometimes it's really gray on what to do. So again, remember, tenant's your customer. You're there to protect your return, but part of that return is making sure you minimize turnover. So you want them to be happy too. So when in doubt, give them a little bit more lenience. Make sure that they know you're giving them some lenience and saying, hey, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. My guess is you didn't mean to do X, Y, Z. Technically, I could bill this whole amount back to you, but let's say we split it or whatever.
Yeah, because to your point, Chris, keeping them happy is going to not ensure they stay, but it increases the likelihood, of course.
Right. And it's always really tough. Like if someone moves in like I had someone move in one time recently. They moved into a property where the owner had lived there before. And in the first week, the kitchen sink filled up with water and was clogged. And the plumber goes out there, snakes the line, and there's all this hair in there. And the owner's like, it drained fine while I was there. And I'm like, yeah, well, this hair didn't get all moldy over the course of a week.
Yeah.
And how did hair end up in the kitchen sink? I guess someone was, washing their hair in there. But anyway, so sometimes it's a little bit of a gray area, and you just kind of got to use your best judgment and try to be fair. So, all right. Emergency maintenance. So this is kind of the interesting area where if you've been doing this on your own or you're doing this on your own, you may not have run into this. But, I'd have to go back and look at the data. But I would guess maybe 5% of our properties every year have emergency maintenance that are above and beyond like, hey, my AC went out. So, like a true like big deal emergency, maybe less than that. So what that would kind of say is like, hey, if you have one property and you own it for 20 years, chances are pretty good you're going to run into an issue like this. Or if you've got 5 properties, chances are pretty good every 4 years you're going to run into something like this. So that's why I kind of say this. So the common things are, again, back to water. So water is like the biggest culprit usually in an emergency repair situation. Thank goodness we haven't had to deal with fire yet. But oftentimes it's like, hey, the valve on something broke and now there's water coming in or whatever. So make sure that you kind of know in your area who you're going to call when something like that happens. Hopefully if it's sudden and accidental, it can be someone, it could be an insurance claim. And you really want to know too, like when do you call? There are people who are like water mitigation experts, water and fire mitigation experts, and we're going to hear from one in just a second. Those are folks that are certified and have like special equipment to like get this stuff out. So I told you about the earlier in the episode, like when I had my leak. Well, guess what? I had these guys out, and they have like these infrared cameras where they can look in the walls and like see where the water is. And then they have this special equipment where they don't have to tear everything apart to get it all dried out. So you're not going to get that with the handyman. And here's another thing. If you don't use the right folks to certify that it's truly dried out and ready to go, you end up with mold problems and whatnot. And now you talk about liability down the road. You don't want to be in that boat. Just get it done right.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple stories about this. We had a townhome where a tenant called us and he's like, hey, there's water coming up under the floor and all this stuff. And we get out there and sure enough, the neighbor's unit had flooded into this townhome and like ruined the entire first floor, and then water coming out the back and whatnot. And it took us a while to figure out exactly where it was coming from. And then we found it was this unit. It was so bad that both units, there were like 3 units plus that had to be where the people living there had to completely move out.
Wow.
It was bad. And this is where, again, back to where a property manager, like people wonder, how can a property manager possibly save me money? So let me tell you, the neighbor, okay, so we call insurance, right? And the townhome association says, this isn't covered by our policy. And I'm like, but as a neighboring unit, We're like, no, it's not covered by our policy. Sure enough, we look through the bylaws, CCNRs. We're like, okay, yeah, get it. So then we call the owner's insurance, and the owner's insurance said, nope, go get it from the neighbor, bill their insurance, not covered by the policy because it's not this homeowner. And I'm like, I don't know that I agree with that, but okay. So then we go ahead and we, property management company, call the neighbor, find out that the neighbor does not have insurance.
Oh.
The neighbor was renting his property. Tenant was out on vacation. And this is when this all happened. I said, okay, well, what about your tenant's renter's policy?
Oh.
What's that?
Oh.
And I'm talking like 20 grand worth of damage.
Wow.
And I was like, you got to be kidding me. So then we go back to the owner's insurance and we're like, hey, sorry, but they don't have insurance. Of course, the owners are all frustrated. I said, hey, let me try something. So I go back to the neighbor. I said, here's the deal. You're going to cut us a check for 20 grand. And I worked with him to actually help him secure a financing source of someone that I knew of that could help him finance his property because he owned it in cash. And he cut us a check for 20 grand to go get this work done for the owner. And then finally the owner's insurance company's like, okay, yeah, fine, we'll pay it. And we're like, hey, we already got it, taken care of. And what was so goofy about it was like the owners were still so angry about all of it. And I'm like, hey guys, we just saved you $20,000. Like, you're welcome.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, and the tenant, he's like, well, the tenant had to be impacted. Blah, blah, blah. I'm like, hey, we didn't start the water leak.
Right.
Your tenant didn't even start the water leak. This was a next door neighbor, And so you might have to deal with that as an owner and just know that, like, so who's going to, while you're working your buns off 60 hours a week and, then coming home and taking care of the kids or whatever, like, who's going to be out there advocating for you? Like, are you gonna have time to go hunt down the neighbor and try to help him get financing sources secured so you can get a $20,000 check? And hopefully that never happens, but that's anyway, that's kind of some of the crazy stuff that can happen.
Someday you're going to be able to write a book about all this, aren't you?
I know. Yeah, it'll be like the true confessions of a retired property manager.
That's amazing though, but really good example of what you as a property manager bring to the table here.
Yeah,
what you can actually do.
Yeah, and there are several times a year where we get a phone call that's like, hey, so I've got water coming in through the ceiling. I have no idea what to do. It's like, all right, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So, and with that, I want to introduce Bruce Powell with PuroClean Water and Fire Damage here, who is going to give us a quick tip today.
Bruce Powell, as Chris mentioned, PuroClean Fire and Water Damage. My quick tip is if you're leaving town for a couple of days or a vacation, turn your water off at the master valve. A couple years ago, we had a issue where we got called. People had gone to Europe for 30 days, and shortly after they left, the hot water line to their hot water heater, broke, and it ran for 30 days. Basically, we had to redo the entire house after that had happened. So it takes 2 seconds to flip that lever. Generally found either in your garage or if you have a basement, in the front wall of the basement. And again, it's not going to hurt anything, especially this time of year. January, February, you might think twice about it because of freezing pipes, but during the summertime, it's not a problem, and it will save you a lot of money and a heartache in the long run. Thank you.
All right. Now let's talk about handling remodeling. So the other thing that you can kind of do is like coffee's kicking in. The other thing, besides, we talked a little bit about preventative maintenance and regular maintenance and then emergency maintenance and now remodels and like big turnovers. So this is big project stuff. Some property managers, they're going to take care of this for you. Other folks won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. They give it back to the owner and they're like, I don't know how to do this. You figure it out. So good luck. We actually will take care of big projects for owners. We think that's a lot of fun. That's where a lot of the cool transformation of property happens. So a lot of fun for us. Make sure you've got set up with a good budget and have contingency budget. I know, Jesse, you've got probably a couple recent experiences that you can attest to in regard to that.
Yeah, no question. So I've worked with a few individuals recently, first-time investors actually, who want to have an investment property, have a rental property. You know, they buy a house they know is going to need some work. They spend X number of dollars getting the home rent ready. They budgeted out, they planned, but they did not plan accordingly. So you thought you needed $15,000 to get that house up and rent ready. You actually needed $25,000 to get that house rent ready. So Chris, to your point, you have to be realistic with your budget and you need to have a plan. Whatever you think your budget might be, add some money on to the end of that. Usually I'd say a couple $1,000s actually. Because
several $1,000s.
Because there are always things that are going to come up. You know, I'll give you a quick, for instance, investor I just worked with, beautiful remodel on a home. This is his first property. The windows, everything worked. I don't know how this passed inspection this way, but the windows will not stay open on this house. So now he's running into an issue where it's probably going to be a window replacement for him. And of course, you're not just going to replace one or two windows at that point. You're going to say, well, there's some wood rot around some of the ones up front and back, so it's more cost effective just to replace all the windows at this time.
Yeah.
That's a budgetary item he did not plan accordingly for.
Well, and sometimes too, what will happen is like you'll go get a quote from Joe in a truck who will do all this under the table, and then guess what? When it comes time to do the work, Joe in a truck doesn't show up,
right?
And you can't find anyone that was as cheap as what he quoted.
Exactly.
You. So go get quotes from reasonable people who are reputable and aren't the bottom of the barrel pricing, who only want to be paid under the table. Like those are a bunch of red flags, and add contingency. And what I'll tell people too is like even when you walk into a house and you go, wow, this is like ready to rent, budget $1,000 to $5,000 to get it ready to rent.
Absolutely.
Because there are going to be things that you just didn't know or realize needed to be fixed. That's going to need to happen. Plus, you ought to make sure, ideally, when you buy that property, that you've got like 6 months worth of reserves in rent of, take 6 times the monthly rent amount. And that should be sitting aside in a checking account as kind of reserves for the property, in addition to contingency that goes on your budget for your remodel.
It's a lesson for property management, but for life itself. Expect the unexpected and plan for it.
Exactly. Also, if you are buying a property and you're kind of budgeting for the remodel and kind of setting everything up, try to get this all done during due diligence if you can. That's a cool little trick that we used to do. So if you can save, a month of vacancy by starting all this stuff early, then you can get, you might be able to save couple thousand bucks in additional rent that you're able to collect. So like if you can have it planned out to where the day after closing, the dumpster shows up and you start doing tear out that day, that's a pretty cool spot to be in. So just think about if there are any opportunities like that. Schedule is going to save you some money there too. And when you're doing a turnover, try not to do big remodels and stuff when tenants are still in the property.
Yeah.
One, that's just not cool unless it's something for them and they're going to take good care of it, and you're kind of doing it to help extend their lease and them to stick around, then that's all good. But especially if they're not great tenants and they're the reason you're doing the remodel in the first place, don't go put a bunch of money into it until after they move out. And don't show the property until the remodel is done.
Right.
And then go take new photos and all that too. Otherwise you're just going to end up in the same boat you're already in. Also, this is where routine inspections can kind of help you over the course of the lease, because you can start to see ahead of time what you're going to be facing during the turnover. So that's it for remodels. We could go on and on about remodels. There are tons of fun stories I suppose we could tell, but that's for another day maybe.
Do we have that one as a podcast yet? Because if not,
not yet.
We're getting there.
I have some ideas.
Oh, promising.
Yeah. Anyway. You want to send us off, Jesse?
Yeah. My gosh, we've hit the end.
Yes.
We thought this one was going to be shorter. We were wrong.
No,
we kind of talked through a lot there: preventative maintenance, emergency maintenance, remodeling. All of this is important, and I guess the biggest takeaway is to plan accordingly for it as best you can. Have a plan in place if you're doing things on your own, of course. I think that would be really, Chris, my biggest takeaway from all of this is that, stuff is going to happen. All the best laid plans, as much preventative maintenance as you do, is not going to prevent something from breaking.
Yep.
And you need to be adjusting for that, sometimes in real time. So, we certainly appreciate you listening. We would definitely appreciate if you would, if you like what you hear, give us a review. Of course, click that subscribe button, and you can also like us on Facebook.
Yeah.
In the meantime, and until next time, this is Jesse
And Chris.
wishing you a brighter life in real estate.